The salvage tug Second Det found the hull 3 days after its scanners first caught the ping, a signal so old and so faint that Captain Vesh had almost logged it as background noise and moved on. Almost. But the ping repeated at exactly 41 minutes, every time, for 600 years by the tug's own dating estimate. And machines that patient made her nervous in a way asteroids never did. She brought the Second Det in slow, running passive sensors only because patient machines sometimes had teeth. What she found didn't look like a ship. It looked like a city that had been folded in half and dropped into space to freeze. 1.5 kilometers of dull gray hull, pitted by micrometeorites, streaked black in places by old fire that had never been repaired. No running lights. No drive flare. No transponder beyond that single stubborn ping, cycling on a frequency so far outside the Trade Compact's register bands that her communications officer, a young Threll named Bantu, had to build a decoder from scratch just to confirm it was a language at all, and not some dying reactor's death rattle. "It's not a distress call," Bantu said, 3 hours into the decode. "It's not asking for anything. It's just saying the same word, over and over." "What word?" Bantu turned the translation matrix around so she could see it. Here, Vesh had salvaged wrecks for 11 years, human ones and Threll ones, and the strange spiral hulls the Asu left behind after their empire folded. She had never once found a wreck that was still, after 6 centuries of silence, quietly insisting on its own location. "Bring us alongside," she said, "but keep the tug's reactor throttled below combat threshold. I don't want to look like I'm here to fight." "Are we here to fight?" "We're here to get paid," she said. "Salvage law says an object adrift and unclaimed for longer than a standard century becomes property of whoever files first. This thing has been sitting out here since before the Compact even mapped this arm of the galaxy. Whatever's inside, it's ours the moment we put a boot on the hull." She did not know, as she said this, that the hull had heard her. The Second Det was a modest ship by Compact standards, crewed by 11, built for hauling wreckage out of debris fields and stripping it for parts. Vesh herself was Threll, 4-limbed and patient in the way her species was known for, having spent 3 centuries of slow diplomatic expansion learning that patience made for better trade margins than conquest ever had. Her crew was a mix: 2 Asu engineers, a pair of silicate-based Carnu who handled anything requiring exposure to vacuum, and near the back of the manifest, 1 human, a systems tech named Priya Okafor, 40 years old, hired 4 years ago in a Compact station because she was cheap, competent, and asked no questions about where the salvage came from. Priya had never told the crew much about where she was from. Humans were rare this far out, a handful of colony worlds, 1 homeworld nobody talked about much because there wasn't much to talk about, a species the Compact records filed under minor, non-aligned, unremarkable. She fixed reactors. She kept to herself. She was, by every measure the crew used, the least interesting person aboard. She was the first one to go quiet when the hull's markings came into clear resolution on the forward viewport. The letters were faded, scorched at the edges, painted in a style nobody used anymore, blocky, high contrast, the kind of lettering meant to be read across a shipyard rather than admired up close. But they were legible. Arc Vessel Perseverance, Earth Departure Authority, Hull 7. Bantu, still parsing the ping's language against a Compact linguistic database that returned nothing, glanced over at Priya. "You're human. Does that mean anything to you?" Priya didn't answer right away. She was staring at the hull the way a person stares at a photograph of someone they were told had died before they were born. "It means everything," she finally said. "And I don't understand any of it." Vesh called a crew meeting in the tug's cramped mess. 6 of 11 present, the others still on shift. She pulled up what little the Compact archives had on humanity, projected in soft blue light above the table. Species, human. Homeworld, Earth Sol System. Status unconfirmed for 340 standard years. Last verified contact predates Compact Eastern expansion. Known colonies, 3 minor, subsistence level. Threat assessment, negligible. Notable for emotional volatility, short lifespans, disproportionate tenacity in resource disputes. That was the entire file. For lines, written by some clerk centuries ago and never updated, Because nobody had bothered to check. 3 colonies and 1 dead homeworld, said Garn, one of the Asu engineers, his voice carrying the particular boredom of someone who salvaged wrecks for a living and had stopped being surprised by anything that didn't have resale value. So this is a wreck from a species that isn't around to complain. Even better, cleaner claim. The homeworld status is unconfirmed, Priya said. Not dead. Unconfirmed. Those aren't the same thing. Same result for salvage law, Garn said. Vesh held up a hand before the argument could go further. The ping is 600 years old by our dating. If this is a colony ark, it left Earth before the compact even reached this arm of space. Which means whatever's inside has been alone out here for 6 centuries, cut off from any authority, any supply line, any contact at all. She looked around the table. I don't care what the archive says about threat level. I care about what happens when something's been alone that long and somebody knocks on the door. You're saying don't board it. I'm saying board it carefully. She turned to Priya. You're human. If there's anyone alive in there, they're your people 600 years removed. I want you on the boarding team. Not as muscle, as a translator if it comes to that, and as someone who might recognize what we're looking at before it becomes a problem. Priya nodded slowly. She did not mention that she had grown up on one of humanity's 3 surviving colonies, hearing stories about the ships that left Earth in its last chaotic decades, stories that were mostly myth by the time they reached her, fragments of names and dates that nobody could confirm. Perseverance was one of the names. She had heard it exactly once from her grandmother, who said it the way people said the names of places that had swallowed everyone who ever went looking for them. She did not sleep well that night. The boarding team was for Vesh, Priya, Garn, and one of the Karnu, a silent, methodical crew member named Dross, who communicated mostly through hand gestures and had never, in 4 years, said more than 100 words to Priya in total. They found an airlock on the Ark's flank, a service hatch dwarfed by the scale of the hull around it, and it took Garn 20 minutes of careful work with a cutting laser and a manual override kit before the outer door groaned and slid aside on tracks that had not moved in 600 years, but had, evidently, been maintained well enough that they moved at all. That detail alone made Priya's skin crawl. A door that old should have seized solid. This one had clearly been serviced, recently, by whatever definition of recently applied to a ship this size. The inner chamber lit up the moment all 4 of them were inside. Not flickering emergency lighting. Not the dim amber glow of failing reserve power. Clean white light, full brightness, activating in a smooth cascade down a corridor that stretched away into the ship's interior, further than their suit lamps could reach. Life support is active, Dross said, reading a handheld sensor, breaking his usual silence. Atmosphere is breathable. Temperature is regulated. Gravity plating is functional. That's not possible, Garn said. Not after 600 years, untended. It hasn't been untended, Priya said quietly. She was looking at the corridor walls, at panels that showed the unmistakable sheen of recent maintenance, new welds over old damage, replacement conduit that didn't quite match the original fittings, patched in a style that was clearly improvised, clearly human, and clearly the work of hands that had kept doing this work for a very long time. Someone's been fixing this ship, she said, for 600 years. Someone's still fixing it now. Vesh raised her weapon slightly, standard salvage team caution, not aggression, and gestured the team forward. Then someone's going to meet us. Stay close. They walked half a kilometer down that corridor before they found the first body. It wasn't a corpse in the way Vesh expected. It was preserved, seated upright in a recessed alcove built into the wall, a memorial niche, deliberately designed. One of what turned out to be hundreds lining the corridor at regular intervals, each with a small brass plaque bearing a name, 2 dates, and a short phrase in the same blocky lettering as the hull markings outside. Priya stopped at the first one and read it aloud without meaning to. Adora Okafor, born Earth. Died Perseverance, year 12. She kept us alive, so we could keep each other alive. She stood very still. Okafor, Garn said, glancing between the plaque and Priya's suit tag. That's your surname. It's a common name, Priya said, in a voice that suggested she did not believe her own sentence. Vesh watched her carefully, but said nothing. She had led enough salvage crews to know that some things needed to be walked through, not around. They kept moving. The corridor opened into wider chambers, what had clearly once been agricultural bays, now converted into something between a farm and a shrine. Rows of hydroponic troughs, still cycling nutrient fluid, tended with obvious care. Alongside walls, covered floor to ceiling in names. Thousands of names. Every alcove, every plaque, every carefully maintained inch of this ship was a record of 600 years of people who had lived and died inside a metal box, in the dark alone, and who had been remembered by whoever came after them well enough to keep their names polished and their gardens growing. This isn't a wreck, Priya said. This is a graveyard that never stopped being a home. Beyond the agricultural bays, the corridor split into three, and a hand-painted sign, faded, repainted so many times over the centuries that the letters had drifted slightly from their original positions, pointed the way toward what the crude lettering called school, medical, and simply the core. Someone generations ago had carved a smaller message beneath the arrow for the core, in handwriting rather than paint, the kind of graffiti that survives not because anyone protects it, but because everyone who passes it agrees, silently, not to paint over it. Ask permission first. Garn ran a gloved hand along the nearest wall, over a stretch of hull plating patched in, at least for visibly different eras of technology. Old rivets giving way to newer welds giving way to something that looked, disturbingly, like fused alien alloy that had no business being there at all. Whoever's kept this ship running, he muttered, wasn't doing it with parts they brought from Earth. 6 centuries of scavenging. Every attacker who ever hit this hull left something behind, and somebody here knew exactly how to use it. That was when the lights ahead of them dimmed, deliberately, and a voice spoke from everywhere and nowhere at once, not translated, not filtered through any device, simply present in the air around them, calm and unhurried and entirely unsurprised by their arrival. You've been walking for 11 minutes, the voice said, in Threll-accented compact trade language, which was itself impossible, since no human on that ship could have learned Threll from a species the compact hadn't even discovered when the Perseverance left Earth. That's longer than I expected a boarding party to wait before announcing themselves. Most people who cut through that airlock don't make it past the first 100 meters before something asks them to stop. Vesh's weapon came up fully now. Identify yourself. I'm the ship, the voice said. Or, I'm what's left of the people who built the parts of me that talk. Depends how you want to think about it. You're standing in the Perseverance. You cut your way in 11 minutes and 40 seconds ago. And in that time you've walked past 412 names, none of which you stopped to read except one. A pause, and when it spoke again there was something in the tone that Priya would later describe, when she finally told the story to anyone who'd believe her, as recognition. Hello, Priya Okafor, the ship said. You have your grandmother's voice. They were brought, not escorted, not forced, simply guided. Doors opening ahead of them and closing behind. To a control chamber near the ship's core, a room built for a crew of 12, but occupied, when they arrived, by exactly one living person. He was old. Not old the way Threll got old. Silvering slowly over 3 centuries. Old the way humans got old, which Priya had only seen in archive footage from Earth, because on her colony people simply didn't live that long before medicine caught up to them. His skin was creased deep, his hair long and white, and he sat in a chair built into the console itself, wired into the ship through cables that ran from a port at the base of his skull, in a way that made Garn visibly recoil, and made Vesh's weapon hand tighten. That's not standard human anatomy, Draw said flatly. The most words Priya had heard him say it once in 4 years. No, the old man said, and his voice matched the one that had spoken in the corridor, though quieter now, more tired, more human. It's not standard anything. My name is Elias Okafor. I'm the last one who volunteered for the Neuralink, and I'm 211 years old. And before you ask, no, that's not natural, and no, I don't recommend it, and yes, I am very tired. Priya took a step forward before Vesh could stop her. Okafor, she said. I know, Elias said. I've known since your ship's tug pinged our hull, with an active scan 3 days ago. I ran your registry code against our old departure manifests. Vesh, Garn, Dross, compact designations, no relation to us. Priya Okafor, human, born on Kessa Colony, 41 years old. He smiled, And it was not an unkind smile, but it was a very old one. Kessa was founded by the Odyssey, Hull 3 of the same departure fleet as this ship. We're not the same family, but we're the same leaving. Vesh finally lowered her weapon, though she did not holster it. Explain, she said. All of it. What is this ship? Why does it still work after 6 centuries? And why does it speak my language? Elias gestured, and the chamber's walls lit with a slow scroll of images, launch footage, blurred and old, of a fleet of a dozen massive vessels lifting away from an Earth wreathed in storms and smoke. Earth was dying when we left, he said. Not from war, not entirely, from ourselves, mostly, from centuries of taking more than the planet could give back. When it became clear the damage couldn't be reversed in time to save everyone, a dozen ships were built, fast and desperate, to carry what people could be saved outward. 12 Orcs. Perseverance was Hull 7. We didn't have faster-than-light drive. We didn't have artificial gravity that worked properly, not at first. We didn't have anything except each other and about 400 years of projected travel time to find somewhere to land. 400 years, Vesh repeated. And it's been 600 since your last confirmed contact. We never found anywhere to land, Elias said simply. Every habitable world we reached in the 1st century was already claimed, or too dangerous or too far. So we kept moving. And somewhere around year 40, we stopped thinking of ourselves as people looking for a destination, and started thinking of ourselves as people who simply had to survive the trip forever. He looked at Priya. Your ancestors on the Odyssey found Kessa. Barely habitable, brutal winters, thin air, but a place to stand. We never got that lucky. We just kept surviving in the dark generation after generation, and every generation had to solve problems the last one couldn't. Failing reactors, radiation leaks, hull breaches, famine twice, a mutiny once in year 80 that we don't talk about much. He tapped the console beside him. And pirates, eventually. 6 times over 6 centuries, something found us and decided a slow-moving ship full of people with no fleet to protect them looked like an easy target. What happened? Garn asked, and for the first time since Priya had known him, he sounded genuinely uncertain he wanted the answer. The first 2 times we lost people, Elias said. Badly. We weren't built for defense, we were built to run. But you can't run forever from something faster than you. So somewhere around year 140, we started building differently. Every generation added something. Weapons scavenged and reverse-engineered from wreckage. We recovered off the raiders who didn't survive attacking us. Armor plating melted down from their own hulls. Targeting systems built by people who had 400 years and nothing else to do but get better at not dying. He shrugged, a small, tired gesture. By the 4th attack, we didn't lose anyone. By the 6th, the ones who attacked us didn't survive to try again, and we made very sure that whatever was left of them broadcast Y on every frequency we could reach, so that word would travel faster than we could. He looked directly at Vesh. That's the ping you followed in. It's not a distress call. It never was. It's the same message we've been putting out since year 180, on a loop, for anyone who might be listening. Here. We are here. Come find out what that costs you. The room was silent for a long moment. You're telling me, Vesh said slowly, that this ship is not a helpless derelict. I'm telling you, Elias said, that this ship is the safest place in this sector of space, provided you don't try to take it from us. You cut through our outer hatch with intent to salvage. Under any other circumstances, that decision gets made for you by systems I don't have to personally authorize. He raised a hand before Vesh's weapon could come back up. But you stopped. You read the names. Your translator understood here as a location, not a threat, that took genuine effort. And I watched your young officer do the work honestly. And you, his gaze went to Priya again, softer now, you have family on this ship whether you knew it or not, 300 years back, before the Odyssey split off from the main fleet in year 60. So instead of what usually happens, we're having a conversation. I'd like to keep it that way. Vesh made Elias repeat that sentence twice before she believed she'd heard it correctly. What usually happens, she said. You've done this before. Recently. 11 days ago, Elias said. A ship from something calling itself the Thren tried the same approach you did. cut the outer hatch, claimed salvage rights on an object abandoned by their assessment. I offered them the same warning I'm offering you. They didn't listen. They had a boarding party of 30 and a support cruiser holding position half a kilometer out, confident that a 600-year-old hulk with no registered defense systems couldn't threaten either. What happened to them? Priya asked, though something in her chest already suspected the shape of the answer. The boarding party is currently in cryo-storage in our medical bay, Elias said. Alive, unharmed, and extremely upset. The support cruiser is not. He said this the way a man reports the weather, flat, unbothered, entirely without cruelty, which somehow made it worse. We don't kill people who can be stopped without killing them. But a warship that opens fire on a civilian vessel forfeits the argument for restraint, and ours is not a young species anymore, whatever the Compact's outdated files say about us. Garn made a small sound that might have been a laugh if it hadn't been so uneasy. You've been fighting off attackers for 600 years, and nobody in the wider galaxy has heard about it. We've been fighting off attackers who don't survive to report it, Elias said. And the ones who do, the Thren Reach boarding party, for instance, tend to describe what they saw in terms their own people find difficult to believe. A slow, unarmed-looking colony ship that turns out to have 6 centuries of accumulated, scavenged, jury-rigged, brutally effective defense technology, built by generations of people who had absolutely nothing else to occupy 400 years of forced isolation, except getting better at staying alive. It sounds like a story. It sounds like exaggeration. Most captains who hear it assume the survivors are lying to cover an embarrassing loss to some third party. He spread his hands. We've never corrected that assumption. It's useful. Vesh looked at her weapon, then holstered it fully, a decision that seemed to cost her something. Show me, she said. Not as a threat. I need to understand what I nearly did to my crew by cutting through that hatch. Elias considered her for a long moment, then nodded, and the walls around them shifted from historical footage to something else entirely. Schematics, tactical logs, 600 years of engagement data scrolling past faster than any of them could fully absorb. Weapon systems built from cannibalized alien hulls. Armor formulas refined across 2 centuries of trial and death. Defense algorithms written by generations of engineers who had inherited not just technology, but an entire culture, organized at its core around one unbending principle. We do not start it. We do not stop until it's finished. And we do not forget. There's something else you should understand, Elias said quietly, as the last of the tactical logs faded. We're not the only Ark that survived. The room went very still. 12 ships left Earth, he continued. The Odyssey, Hull 3, found Kessa and settled. That's Priya's line. 2 others we lost contact with in the 1st century and presumed destroyed or simply too far to hear now. But the rest of us, the other 8, we found each other again slowly over the centuries, drifting through the same general region of space because we were all following roughly the same search patterns our launch algorithms gave us 400 years apart. We don't travel together. We're too far apart for that, most of the time. But we talk. We share what we learn. Every defense innovation any one Ark develops gets passed to the others, eventually, on the same long-cycle broadcast loop you heard as a ping. He looked at each of them in turn. So when you ask what happens to a fleet that attacks one Ark expecting an easy salvage target, understand that you're not just asking what one crippled colony ship can do. You're asking what 8 of them, 6 centuries practiced, all listening to each other, are capable of when provoked. And so far, nobody in this region of the galaxy has been foolish enough to actually find out. Before Vesh made her decision, she asked to see the Thren Reach boarding party, and Elias, without hesitation, agreed. The medical bay was smaller than Priya expected, tucked 2 decks below the control chamber, its walls lined not with memorial plaques, but with cryo units, most of them dark and empty, humming at standby. 30 of them were active, each holding a single occupant suspended in slow blue light, chests rising and falling at a fraction of normal speed, faces slack with a sleep none of them had chosen. They're not damaged, Elias said, walking the row with the easy familiarity of a man checking on livestock, or perhaps something gentler than that, A man checking on people he'd been forced to hurt and didn't take pleasure in it. Sedated, contained, medically stable. We could wake any of them in under 10 minutes if you wanted to speak to them. Why keep them at all? Garn asked. You said the cruiser outside didn't survive. Why not just space the boarding party and be done with it? Something in Elias's face went cold. The first genuinely hard expression Priya had seen from him. Because we are not the thing this galaxy assumes we'll become if it corners us long enough, he said. That's the entire point. Anyone can kill people who can't fight back. It takes 600 years of discipline to keep choosing not to, every single time, even when it would be easier. He stopped beside one unit, a young Thran officer, barely out of what Priya guessed was their species' equivalent of adolescence. Her face peaceful in stasis. She was 17 shipboard years old when she boarded us, following orders from a captain who is currently in pieces half a kilometer from this hull. When she wakes up, she'll be told the truth, that her ship attacked first, that we offered terms before we offered force, that she's alive because we chose it, not because we couldn't have chosen otherwise. What she does with that information afterward is hers to decide. We're not in the business of making minds up for people. We're only in the business of surviving them. Vesh studied the sleeping rows for a long moment. And when the Thran Reach comes looking for their missing cruiser, then we'll return their people unharmed, with a full record of what happened, and let them decide whether that's worth a second attempt, Elias said. So far, no one who's received that offer has taken us up on the second attempt. It's a more effective deterrent than a body count would ever be. A grave gives a government something to avenge. 30 living witnesses, telling the same unembellished story, gives them something to believe. Priya thought of the 412 names in the corridor, and then of the 30 sleeping strangers in front of her and understood, with a kind of ache she hadn't expected, that both were the same policy wearing different faces, a species that had learned, through 6 centuries of forced patience, exactly how much force was necessary and refused, on principle, to spend one measure more. You could have told us this from the beginning, she said. Led with the prisoners instead of the graveyard. I could have, Elias agreed. But the graveyard is the truer story. The prisoners are just what we do because of it. 9 days after the second debt left the Perseverance behind, Vesh's report reached Compact Central, filed through the relay station at the edge of Threll administrative space, flagged for priority review by an archivist named Sella Rune, who had spent 11 years quietly updating species files nobody else read and had, until that morning, considered it the least glamorous posting in the Compact Civil Service. She read the report twice. Then she pulled the existing Human Archive entry, for lines unchanged for 3 centuries, and sat with both documents open side by side for a long time before she did anything at all. Threat assessment. Negligible, the old file said. Defensive capability. Extensive combat tested. Distributed across a coordinated fleet of unknown total size. Recommend all vessels avoid unsanctioned boarding or salvage attempts, the new one said. She thought about the standing salvage bulletins the Compact issued weekly to independent haulers and licensed tugs across a dozen sectors, the standard advisories that told captains like Vesh which categories of unclaimed wreck were safe to approach and which required caution, pre-collapse ASA hulls, certain classes of automated Karna mining platform, anything flagged as belonging to the reclusive Vantis enclaves. Humanity's 3 known colonies and their handful of registered vessels had never once appeared on that list, because nobody had ever thought to put them there. She amended the bulletin that afternoon, added a new flagged category, unidentified pre-compact human design hulls, any configuration, and attached Vesh's report in full, unedited, including the line Elias had asked to be included word for word. The bulletin went out to every licensed hauler, tug, and independent salvage operator in Compact-administered space within 6 hours. It reached, among many others, a Thran Reach shipping registry office, still quietly working out how to explain the loss of a cruiser to a colony ship its own intelligence file had also rated negligible. And it reached, 3 relay hops later, a scout vessel from an ambitious young empire on the galaxy's far rim that had been drawing up expansion routes through a region of unclaimed space that, until that morning, had looked entirely empty on every chart they owned. None of them ever tested it. That was, in the end, the entire point of the message. Not a threat delivered once and forgotten, but a warning that worked precisely because it kept quietly, patiently, being believed. Vesh sat with that for a long time before she spoke again. When she did, her voice was careful in a way Priya hadn't heard from her before. "I filed a salvage claim on your ship before we boarded," she said. "Standard procedure. It's registered with the Compact Authority Station 4 days travel from here. If I don't cancel it within the claim window, automated systems flag this vessel as contested property, and eventually, weeks, months, doesn't matter how long, someone bigger than my tug crew comes to enforce it." "I'd assumed as much," Elias said. "It's why I'm talking to you, instead of simply asking you to leave." "What do you want from me?" "I want you to cancel the claim," Elias said. "And I want you to tell your Compact, honestly, what you found here. Not to frighten them. I have no interest in the galaxy living in fear of us. That's not who we chose to become out here. But your archive file on humanity says negligible threat, unremarkable. That file gets someone killed eventually, one of your captains, some crew who trusts an outdated record and cuts through a hatch on a different arc 30 years from now, with less patience than I've shown you today. I'd rather the truth cost us a little mystery than cost someone their whole crew." Vesh was quiet for a moment. "And if I refuse? If I file the confirmation and let the Compact send a proper fleet to test what you've told me?" Elias's expression didn't change, but something in the room did, a subtle shift in the light, in the low hum beneath the floor plating. The sound of a system very old and very patient quietly confirming it was still capable of what it claimed. "Then I'd ask you to reconsider," he said, "for your own sake, not mine. I don't want that fight. I've spent 600 years not wanting that fight, and every person entombed in the walls of this ship spent their whole lives working so the next generation wouldn't have to have it either. But I won't lie to you and pretend we'd lose it." He leaned forward, and for the first time, some of the tiredness in his voice sharpened into something harder, something Priya recognized instinctively, the way you recognize weather before it arrives. "We left a dying world with nothing," Elias said. "No fleet, no home, no guarantee we'd survive the first decade, let alone 6 centuries. Everyone who's tried to take that from us since, pirates, empires, the Thren Reach 11 days ago, made the same mistake. They assumed a species that looks tired and unarmed on the outside has nothing left to lose. We have everything left to lose. That's the whole reason we're still here." He sat back. "So, run while you can, Captain. Vesh, not as a threat, as the truth. It's what we've told everyone who's found us. It's what kept the 6 who attacked and lost from becoming 7, 8, 9. I'd like it to keep working." It was Priya who broke the silence that followed, because she was the only one in that room who understood, in her bones, what Elias was actually offering. "You're not warning us away because you're strong," she said slowly. "You're warning us away because you don't want to have to prove it again. Every fight costs you people, real people, whose names go on a wall. You'd rather we just believe you." Elias looked at her, and something in his ancient, careful face eased, just slightly. "Your grandmother used to say something similar," he said. "Not to me. She left with the Odyssey 300 years before I was strong enough to be wired into this chair. But the recordings survive. Family history was the one thing every Ark kept obsessively, because it was the one thing that couldn't be manufactured or scavenged. It had to be carried." He gestured to the walls, to the thousands of names beyond them. "You want to know what we actually are, under 600 years of hull patches and salvaged weapons? We're not conquerors. We never wanted to be. We're just people who refuse to disappear quietly, and who found out the hard way that the galaxy doesn't respect anything except a species willing to prove that refusal over and over, for as long as it takes." Vesh finally spoke, quiet, decisive. "I'm canceling the claim," she said. "Now before we leave this room, so there's no ambiguity in the filing." She looked at Elias. "And I'll report what I found. Accurately, not to frighten anyone, to correct a mistake in a 4-line file that's going to get somebody killed exactly like you said." Elias inclined his head, something like genuine relief crossing his face for the first time since they'd entered the chamber. "Thank you. One condition," Vesh added. Name it. When Priya's ready, and only when she's ready, I want this ship to open a real channel to Kessa Colony. Not a broadcast. Not a ping. A conversation. 300 years is long enough for two branches of the same family to have lost each other. Elias looked at Priya for a long moment, and for just a second, the tiredness that had sat behind his eyes since they'd entered the room lifted entirely, replaced by something that looked, unmistakably, like hope. I would like that very much, he said. So would every name on that wall. They left the Perseverance 4 hours later. Vesh's claim formally cancelled, filed and countersigned before they'd even crossed back through the outer hatch. Garn had spent most of the return walk in stunned silence, occasionally muttering calculations about the tactical logs he'd seen, the kind of numbers that would keep an engineer awake, reworking his understanding of what unarmed derelict could actually mean. Dross said nothing at all, which from Dross was its own kind of statement. Priya lingered longest at the airlock, looking back down the long white corridor at 412 names she hadn't stopped to read, and thousands more beyond them she hadn't had time to find. Each one a person who had lived and died keeping a promise made by people who never got to see whether it worked. I'll come back, she told the ship, and somewhere in the walls, she was fairly sure, Elias heard her. I know, the ship said. We're patient. We've had 600 years of practice. The second det pulled away an hour later, and Vesh, standing on the bridge, watched the Ark shrink back into the dark on her view screen, silent, dark-hulled, deliberately unremarkable. Exactly the way it had looked when they found it. Exactly the way it would look to the next ship that stumbled across that faint, patient ping. Compose a report to Compact Central, she told Bantu. Full priority. Species designation. Human. Correct the archive. What do I put under threat assessment? Bantu asked. Vesh thought about the tactical logs still burning behind her eyes. 6 centuries of scavenged weapons, of names on a wall, of a species that had been given nothing and had built, out of sheer refusal to vanish, something the galaxy had never once had reason to test. Put this, she said. Verified contact, Ark vessel Perseverance, human crewed, 600+ years, independent operation. Defensive capability, extensive combat tested, distributed across a coordinated fleet of unknown total size. Recommend all vessels avoid unsanctioned boarding or salvage attempts on any unidentified hull-matching pre-compact human design markers. She paused, then added the line Elias had asked her to include word for word, because it was, in the end, the simplest and most honest thing anyone could say about what she'd just seen. They are not looking for a fight, she said. But if you find them, and you make one, run while you can. Somewhere behind them, 600 years deep into a journey that had never been about arriving anywhere, the Perseverance kept drifting, kept broadcasting its single patient word into the dark, and kept waiting. Not for rescue, not anymore, but for the day, whenever it finally came, when the rest of the galaxy learned to leave quiet things alone. 6 weeks later, on Kessa Colony, in a farming settlement built on the thin, cold soil of a world that had never been kind and had never once let its people forget it, an elderly woman named Adiz Okafor was woken before dawn by a knock on her door that turned out to be her granddaughter's supervisor, a Threll trade official she had met exactly twice, standing awkwardly on the porch with a data slate held out like an offering. There's a transmission request, the official said, routed through compact relay, flagged as family priority. It says it's from a ship called the Perseverance. He hesitated. It also says it's been waiting 300 years to send it. Adiz did not understand, not fully, not until she sat down at the colony's single long-range comm terminal. With her whole family crowded in around her, sons, daughters, grandchildren, a great-grandson barely old enough to stand, and a voice came through the static that sounded old and careful and impossibly glad. My name is Elias, the voice said. I don't know if this reaches the right family. Records this old are never certain. But 300 years ago, Hull 3 of our departure fleet made a choice Hull 7 didn't, to stop, to land, to stay. I spent most of my life wondering if that choice worked out for you the way ours worked out for us. A pause, filled with nothing but the faint hiss of a signal crossing an enormous, patient distance. I'd like to hear about it, if you're willing to tell me. We have time. We've always had time. It's mostly what we had instead of a home. Adiz Okafor, 83 years old, born on a colony her own grandmother had helped carve out of frozen ground with tools that broke twice a season, looked around at 4 generations of a family that had, against every reasonable expectation, simply refused to stop existing, and found that she had a great deal to say. She talked for 6 hours. The Perseverance listened to every word and asked, when she was finally done, if it could tell her about the wall. 2 branches of the same leaving, 300 years and half a galaxy apart, finally found each other again, not because either had been searching, but because neither had ever quite stopped believing the other might still be out there, somewhere in the dark, patiently, stubbornly, still here.